tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
The LCBO is not a necessary entity in this province. I actually have a photo of Ontarians lining up outside an LCBO I wanted to share with you here. Oh, sorry, no, that's the Soviet bread line. Never mind. Scratch that. Thought I had the LCBO photo there. They're very similar sometimes. David Clement joins us. He is the North American Affairs Manager for the Consumer Choice Center, and I would say probably one of the LCBO's biggest critics, just as it's a fundamental structure here. David, good to talk to you again. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let's start off with this $2.5 billion, because what OPSEU is trying to pretend here is that it's providing this great service to the people of Ontario, and we would just not have a functioning society. We wouldn't have a functioning welfare state if it weren't for the LCBO. And that is just patently untrue.
Yeah, it is untrue. Most people don't realize, apparently neither does the union, that the dividend the LCBO pays is primarily as the wholesaler. So all alcohol sold in the province, whether it's at a restaurant, whether it's at a grocery store, whether it's at an actual winery that produces the wine, the LCBO tax on their markup. And so if you're at a winery, and most people don't know this, and kind of the light bulb goes off when I explain this. So if you're at a winery in Niagara, you buy a bottle of wine from that winery, you may often wonder, well, why is the price not better than at the LCBO?
Yeah, it was made 6 feet from here, right?
Yeah, it was made 6 feet from here. It never went into an LCBO warehouse. Well, this doesn't make any sense. It's because the LCBO includes their markup on all alcohol. That's where the revenue to the province comes from. It doesn't matter who sells it. In fact, if alcohol sales were to remain the same during the strike, so Ontarians bought the same amount of alcohol, the revenue to the province would go up, not down. It would go up, because when you buy from a grocery store, you're not paying to keep the lights on at the 680 plus retail stores that the LCBO operates. And so the LCBO doesn't have to operate a single retail store in order to generate money. And we already know that this is true because the government had the choice to do exactly that for cannabis, and they opted not to. Why? Because it's cheaper and more efficient not to, and it's more responsible for taxpayers in the province as a result. And so we have OPSEU behaving as if those who want to get rid of the retail side of the LCBO are talking about some alternative reality that doesn't exist. And they're forgetting that Ontario doesn't have a single storefront retail for alcohol. The province doesn't physically sell a single tobacco product or vape, generate hundreds of millions of dollars off of that. Alberta has exactly the model that I'm talking about, in terms of the province has a monopoly on wholesale, but allows for private retailers to sell the alcohol. BC has a mixed model, which is probably what Ontario would look like in transition, where you have government stores as well as private retailers existing. And so the idea that we need OPSEU to generate the revenue for the province is just completely false.
Well, and I'll also make the point here that no one, I mean, you and I are proposing it, but no one in the Ontario government is even proposing abandoning the LCBO retail right now. The issue is allowing convenience stores to sell, some ready-made beverages here. Like, it actually will not jeopardize the OPSEU workers' deal at all, except in the sense that it makes consumers aware that, oh yeah, maybe I prefer this. Maybe I prefer to go to this store that I'm already at buying a 2-liter bottle of Coke and also pick up my White Claws there.
Yeah, exactly. It's about convenience, and it may sound trivial to a certain extent, but it actually means quite a bit to be able to go grocery shopping and then pick up whatever else you might need on the beverage side. Now, I wish that the rollout in grocery stores and convenience stores was even larger. It should have included spirits as well. It doesn't. The LCBO, under the new framework, would maintain a monopoly on that. I don't think that they should have that. But yeah, it's they're holding drinkers in the province ransom now over ready to drink cocktails, and I think most people just see how ridiculous and silly that is.
And the arguments are always, anytime there's been a labor dispute, the arguments have always been ridiculous. Like I know in the past, OPSU was really making it seem like they were the answer to drunk driving, that there would be drunk
Mhm.
drivers on the streets in large numbers if LCBO unionized employees were not the ones that got to be the gatekeepers on alcohol purchases. And there's been no evidence to suggest that. And as evidenced by the fact that convenience store owners have tremendous penalties if they are caught selling tobacco to minors. And LCBO does not that. The liquor store is not losing its liquor license. Like,
Correct. Yeah, the opposite is actually true. And I remember when they ran the campaigns when this corner store plan was first thought of when Doug Ford won. And there were these really nasty ads that, in my opinion, touched on some very uncomfortable stereotypes about who runs
mhm.
convenience stores. They
Yes,
were
yes.
really gross, very mega esque in the stereotypical way of like really going after ethnic communities who often operate these stores on the premise that they weren't going to be responsible retailers in ID. But all of the secret shopper data actually suggests the opposite is true because they have skin in the game. If they don't ID for age restricted goods, they get fined. If they get caught several times, they lose their ability to sell age restricted goods completely. And that's, I mean, then your business model fails. So they have skin in the game. If an LCBO employee fails to ID, I don't know there are any ramifications at all. I mean,
No, and I used to work for the LCBO and I wrote a column about this. And there were, you could kind of get a slap on the wrist if you got caught. At the end of
Mhm.
the day, there was no penalty for it. And certainly the store itself had no penalty or liability for it. And I wanted to ask you about where this is going to go, because Ontario consumers are now getting this, propaganda from the union. And I love that they try to make billionaires out to be the bad guys here and not like some small business that wants to open up a wine and liquor store, some independent wine or liquor shop, some independent convenience store owner. Like that to me is also an incredibly disingenuous part of this, is that, yeah, there are some corporate profits that are going to do well if Loblaws can sell vodka and whiskey and whatever, but there are a whole bunch of independent small businesses that could open up as well if we were to have a freer alcohol retail environment in this province.
Yeah, it would democratize commerce while generating the same, if not more, revenue for the province. Who would be against that? That is the most baffling thing. Is like, well, why would we want to keep predominantly small businesses out of the game just so that OPSU can maintain its retail monopoly for its LCBO cashiers? That's a bad deal. It's a bad deal for taxpayers and it's a bad deal for consumers because, again, this really only matters because they have that monopoly. If they didn't have that monopoly, they would go on strike and the options for consumers, the alternatives for consumers would be endless rather than being very limited. Now, the Ford government did release that map, which is certainly helpful, but it is significantly limited in terms of where you can buy specifically spirits. But I would also say most wines. You're not going to be able to buy most wines at the alternative stores because the LCBO still has the monopoly on where those are sold.
David Clement is the North American Affairs Manager over at the Consumer Choice Center. Great to talk to you, David. Thanks for coming on today.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.